In 2015, Theranos was valued at $9 billion. It was running blood tests on real patients across America, tests that were, in many cases, dangerously wrong. The company had one product. That product did not work. Elizabeth Holmes founded Theranos in 2003 at the age of 19. She had just completed her freshman year at Stanford. She dropped out, returned a year's tuition to her parents, and incorporated a company in Delaware. Most people her age were choosing a major. The idea was genuinely compelling. Holmes believed that conventional blood testing was broken, slow, expensive, and requiring far too much blood. She proposed a device that could run hundreds of diagnostic tests from a single finger prick. Results in hours, not days. Cost a fraction of the standard rate. On paper, this was a revolution. Blood testing is a $75 billion global industry. The potential to democratize diagnostics to catch disease early in people who couldn't afford traditional labs was real, and it was powerful. Holmes knew how to describe it. She was very good at describing it. She adopted the black turtleneck. She dropped her voice to an almost theatrical baritone. She studied Steve Jobs with the dedication of a doctoral candidate. The performance was meticulous. What was missing was the science. Theranos called its device the Edison. The Edison was supposed to run its proprietary nanotainer of blood through a miniaturized analyzer and return results with clinical accuracy. Independent scientists who later examined it described it as a glorified box. Inside, a commercial Siemens analyzer, the kind any hospital already owned. The Edison could not reliably perform most of the tests Theranos was selling. So the company did something straightforward. It sent the majority of its samples to conventional third-party labs using conventional methods, while continuing to tell the world its proprietary technology was doing the work. This is called fraud. At the time, it was called innovation. Now, the board, let us discuss the board. Theranos assembled what can only be described as a foreign policy dream team. George Shultz, former Secretary of State. Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State. James Mattis, retired four-star general. William Perry, former Secretary of Defense. 2 former senators. These were the names on the letterhead. Not one of them had a background in medicine, biology, or diagnostics. Holmes understood something important. Legitimacy is transferable. You do not need to be credible yourself if you are standing next to enough people who are. The board lent her their reputations. In exchange, they received equity in a $9 billion company. Everyone was satisfied. The investors arrived. By 2014, Theranos had raised an estimated $945 million. Rupert Murdoch invested $125 million personally. The DeVos family contributed $100 million. The Walton family participated. Larry Ellison passed. He later said he found Holmes unconvincing. This will not make him a hero of this story, but it is worth noting. Holmes appeared on the cover of Fortune, Forbes, and Inc. simultaneously. She was named the youngest self-made female billionaire in American history. Forbes estimated her net worth at $4.5 billion. Her net worth was, in fact, zero. She owned stock in a company whose core technology did not function, but the covers looked excellent. In 2013, Theranos signed a deal with Walgreens, then with Safeway. Patient service centers opened in Arizona and California. Real people walked in. Real blood was taken. Real results were returned. The results were, with disturbing frequency, wrong. A patient was falsely told her HIV medication was not working. A man received incorrect results suggesting he might have cancer. Physicians were prescribing treatment based on Theranos numbers generated by a machine the company's own engineers had flagged internally as unreliable. The emails exist. They were sent. Nothing changed. Here is the turning point. October 2015. John Carreyrou, a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, published an investigation. He had spent months speaking to former employees under conditions of considerable personal risk. Theranos' legal team was, by all accounts, aggressive. His article ran with a headline that asked whether the lab tests were as accurate as the company claimed. The answer, his reporting suggested, was no. Holmes went on CNBC the same day. He called the article factually and scientifically erroneous. She called it a smear campaign. She was composed. She was convincing. She had been convincing for 12 years. The stock of her conviction had not yet been marked to market. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services began an inspection. What they found at Theranos' Newark, California laboratory was, in the language of regulatory bodies, deficient. In plain language, the lab posed immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. This is not a phrase regulators use lightly. They used it here. In 2016, CMS moved to revoke Theranos' laboratory certification and ban Holmes from operating any clinical lab for 2 years. Walgreens terminated its partnership and sued for $140 million. Safeway, which had spent approximately $350 million building out its in-store clinics in anticipation of the Theranos rollout, had already quietly walked away the year prior. $350 million. Quietly. The SEC charged Holmes and former company president Ramesh Balwani with fraud in 2018. The Department of Justice followed with criminal charges, wire fraud, conspiracy. The $9 billion valuation evaporated. The actual cash raised, nearly $1 billion, was gone. The company dissolved in September 2018. At trial, the jury heard testimony from patients who had made medical decisions based on false results. They heard from employees who had raised concerns internally and been silenced. They heard recordings Holmes had made of conversations with pharmaceutical executives, conversations in which Theranos had misrepresented partnerships to investors. The evidence was, to put it plainly, extensive. In January 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of criminal fraud. She was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. Balwani received a 12-year sentence. She reported to prison in May 2023. She was 39 years old. She had spent nearly her entire adult life running this company. George Schultz's grandson Tyler had worked at Theranos and become one of Carrierou's key sources. He did so knowing his grandfather sat on the board, knowing the legal consequences, knowing what it would cost him personally. George Schultz, when informed, initially sided with Holmes. He later expressed regret. This is a family dinner that did not go well. Here is the lesson, and it is not subtle. Silicon Valley's founding myth, fake it till you make it, is a software story. It works when the cost of failure is a crashed app or a wasted beta. It does not work when the product is a diagnostic test and the customer is a human being with a body. The category error at Theranos was not just ethical. It was categorical. Hardware is not software. Biology is not a pitch deck. The deeper lesson is about due diligence, or the performance of it. $945 million moved toward a company that had never published peer-reviewed data, never allowed independent validation of its technology, and actively prevented outside scrutiny. Every investor who wrote a check decided that the aura of credibility was sufficient. It was not. It never is. If you found this story entertaining, you may want to examine what that says about you. Or you may simply want to watch what happened to WeWork next, a company that lost $40 billion in valuation in roughly 6 weeks and still managed to throw very good parties on the way down. Subscribe for more hidden empires.